So hi everyone, good morning. Thanks so much for joining us and welcome to today's Q&A session on planning your child's support, working together with the school. I'm Annie, I'm a Senior Advice and Information Officer at Enquire, and I'm here with Hannah and Mark, who are two of our helpline advisors, and Greg from Just Sign, who's providing BSL interpretation for us today. So the plan for today, I'm going to give just a quick summary of what we offer at Enquire. And then I'm going to pass you over to Hannah, who will give us about a 5-minute summary of some of the kind of top things to know in this kind of topic area in terms of the laws and guidance. And then we're going to have about 30 to 40 minutes for all your questions. So before we get started, I'll explain a bit about what we do at Enquire. So Enquire provides independent advice and information to parents, carers, professionals, children and young people about support for learning in Scottish schools and nurseries. So that includes things like your rights as a parent or carer, your child's rights to support for learning, and advice on how to work together with the school and resolve any disagreements that might come up. We offer direct advice on the phone, emails, and web chat. And there's more details about that on our Facebook page and also on our website, which is www.enquire.org.uk. Our website has also got a lot of information on some of the key questions that parents and professionals ask us through our helpline. And we also have an advice and information website for children and young people, which is www.reach.scot. We're also part of a partnership called My Rights, My Say, which provides advice, support, including advocacy to children aged 12 to 15 to help them use some of the specific rights they've got to be involved in decisions about their support. A little bit of quick housekeeping before I pass on to Hannah. The session is recorded, so you can always catch up on it later if you're not able to stay for the whole thing. We've only got about 30-40 minutes, so if we don't manage to get to your question, please look at the information that we'll be linking to, and you can always get in touch with one of our advisors through our helpline as well to talk things through. If any questions are quite complex or if they're not specifically relevant to today's topic, we might ask you to contact our helpline instead, just so you can get some more in-depth advice there. We want to make sure that we're meeting everyone's needs, so please give us feedback. We're going to post a few questions at the end just to hear a little bit more about things like whether this is a good time of day, if the format works for you, things like that. One request is that nobody shares children's names or the names of schools or teachers, just so that we can protect everyone's privacy. And finally, if we kind of look down or to the side a bit, it's because we're kind of looking at your questions coming in, so don't worry about that. So I think we're good to go if everyone's ready, so you can start getting your questions in while Hannah gives us a bit of a summary about planning your child's support, working together with school.
Super, thanks Annie. So at this time of year, teachers and support staff will be getting to know your children and planning their support. So it's a really good time to talk about plans for your child's support and to see how you, your child and the school can all work together. So firstly, it's really important to know that you as a parent or carer and your child have a right to be involved in decisions about their support, as well as being involved in decisions you and your child. Sorry, I've got a bit of something playing in the background there. Sorry, one moment. I had a strange sound there. Sorry. So anyway, sorry. So as I was saying, it's important to know that you as a parent or carer and your child have a right to be involved in decisions about their support, as well as being involved in decisions you and your child's views, and any information you provide should be taken into account. One of the key ways you might be involved is through the school and teachers planning process, which is one of the reasons why it's something we talk about a lot on the helpline and how important planning is. Secondly, it might be helpful to know that there is a legal duty on local authorities, normally through their schools, to keep children with additional support needs support under review. And planning is one of the really important ways they do this. It's not necessarily just about a child having a specific written support plan, but that there is a shared and documented understanding of your child's needs, the goals set for them, the support needed to reach these goals, how progress will be measured, when this will be reviewed and new goals set, or when you've all agreed to talk if support needs to be changed because it's not working for your child. For many children with additional support needs, this cycle of planning will, by setting goals and reviewing progress, might not be a formal written plan. However, for some children who need further support or where their parents are concerned about the support being delivered, written plans are used. However, there are lots of different types of plans and they have different purposes and may be called different things depending on what council area you live in. For example, there's IEPs, ABLE plans, wellbeing plans, healthcare plans, amongst many others. Our Planning Your Child's Learning fact sheet, which we'll link to in the comments, covers the different types of plans in more detail. There is only one legal plan in education called a Coordinated Support Plan, CSP for short. There's a specific criteria for when this plan is used that we might get into the questions today, but mainly it's where significant support for learning from education plus another outside agency from education is needed. We also have a fact sheet on that covers CSPs in more detail, if that's something you think you might want to look into. So planning can really help schools and parents work together as partners to avoid and solve problems. Hence one of the reasons we talk about a lot on the helpline. And it's also always important to remember that you have a right to be involved in your child's learning and have your voice heard. Asking for a meeting to talk to the school about what the plan is for your child. It's often the first step we suggest to families on the helpline. But it can also be helpful to know that you have a right to bring an advocate or supporter along to your meetings. This can be really useful if you're finding meetings quite overwhelming or you're not feeling heard. This could just be a family member or a friend who takes notes and helps you keep on track in the conversation, or they could speak on your behalf or your child's behalf, if that would be helpful. It could also be a professional advocate or supporter, and you can search for those on our website. Or you can speak to your local carer centres, and carer centres can often provide that type of support, but there are also kind of formal advocacy services that can be really helpful in some situations. So another strategy some families use when working with the school is getting a bit difficult is following up meetings with an email, thanking those who attended and explaining your understanding of what was discussed and what's going to happen next and when. This can keep everyone right and make sure there's no misunderstandings. We have lots of other tips. Those are just a few on working together with your child's school in our fact sheet, which we will link to in the comments below. Hopefully we'll get into some of the other kind of tips that we often talk about on the helpline to help things work together smoothly. But I'm wondering if any questions have come in before I go any further, Annie?
Yeah, so we've had a question from Anila, which we'll start with. So Anila's asked kind of how to deal with the school and they're kind of denying your child's needs, and what you can do in that situation.
Shall I give a start to answering that?
Yeah.
So thanks for your question, Anila. It sounds like a really difficult situation when maybe you and the school aren't feeling like you're on the same page as each other. It maybe depends slightly on what you've already tried. The first step we would normally suggest is asking for a meeting with your child's class teacher, maybe if they're in primary school, or if they're in high school, maybe their guidance or pastoral care teacher, and seeing if you can try and find some form of shared understanding with them about what things your child's struggling with or what they might need extra support with. I think I saw your question as well come in, and it mentions that the schools sort of aren't paying attention to diagnosis as well. So for that, the school have a legal responsibility to take account of your views and your child's views and that includes any information that you want to share with them. So if you've got a report or something from another professional, then you could share that with the school, and they should be taking that into account. We also have recently put an infographic up on our website about sharing information with your school. We put it there for children that are returning to school after the summer holidays, but it's a bit more widely applicable. And it's got lots of tips on that for trying to put together a kind of passport or document that explains a bit more about who your child is and what their views are and what things they're struggling with, or maybe feel like they could do some help with, and also their strengths and what things they enjoy and are passionate about too. So that might be quite a helpful thing to maybe put together and then share with the school and ask for a meeting to talk through that. If you're still struggling to reach an agreement with them, or if you've already tried those things, then you could try escalating it up a little bit within the school and maybe speaking to the head of support for learning. In primary schools, that's often a deputy or head teacher. And in high schools, sometimes there'll be a specific sort of support for learning department. And if you're still struggling after that, there are further steps as well, like getting in touch with your local authority. And we've got a fact sheet about avoiding and solving problems that explains all those options too. But that was a very long answer, so I'll stop there. I'm not sure if there's anything I've maybe missed there, Hannah.
No, I don't think that. It sounds like a difficult situation, Anila, and hopefully, kind of going back to the school and having some more conversations and maybe talking about a plan and your joint understanding of what your child's needs are might be a good place to start. But as Mark said, you can kind of escalate things a bit further up if you continue to not feel heard.
Great, thanks both of you. We've had the questions from Amanda asking if her child is entitled to additional support at nurseries. He's got undiagnosed ASD and is kind of awaiting assessment. So now our theme is kind of specifically on kind of planning and working with the schools. So maybe, don't know if Hannah, if you want to start talking a bit about kind of how you might work together with the nursery in that kind of situation.
Yeah, certainly. So thanks for getting in touch, Amanda. So firstly, maybe we'll go into the planning side of it mainly, but yes, if your son, I think, was struggling at school, then he at nursery, then he still has the same rights to support. If he's getting his funded hours, he's entitled to support. They should be working together with you to identify his needs. So that's often kind of where it starts, with the working together processes. If a young person's struggling at nursery or primary school, it might start with the school and you having some conversations about what support can be provided in the nursery environment or in the school, to see what's working at home and what might be working in nursery, to start to put together a plan. If the nursery are unsure, they might ask kind of other professionals to get involved to try and identify the right support for your son. But if he's struggling, then they should be working together with you, Amanda. And if they're struggling at that level, then they can look to kind of other professionals to identify the right way to support your son. So the main thing to start with is, if you feel he's struggling, then going back to the nursery, if to ask for a meeting to talk about his support and what kind of, and his needs and what you're seeing at home and what they're seeing in nursery, to see what the next step might be. And that could kind of end in that you could have a formal plan about that if you feel that would be helpful. Or if things aren't moving forward, speaking to the school about how else they can identify his needs and how to kind of get the right support in place for him. Don't know if you've got kind of anything more to add, Mark, on that one.
No, just maybe to re-emphasize that your son doesn't need a formal diagnosis for you to start having these conversations with the nursery. And it might even be that some of those conversations include whether or not you want to start him on the process of trying to get a diagnosis, and whether that might be helpful for him or down the line to for whatever reasons. But if he's struggling for whatever reason, then that's where the issue lies, and that's what you can have the conversation with the nursery about, and it shouldn't be getting stuck on whether he does or doesn't have a diagnosis in place.
Yeah, great, thanks. We've had a question in from Geraldine, which I'll read out to both of you. So we're in transition year between primary school and high school. I've asked for a meeting to start planning this, but concerned that because he's academically very able, they don't see the high need for help with personal care skills and communication and school anxiety. I'm not sure what to be asking for. So I don't know if Mark, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Well, thanks, Geraldine, and for your question. And it's a big time a young person moving up to high school, and it can be a worrying time, not just for them but for their family as well, and we know that. In terms of your child's rights, that it's worth knowing that their right to get support or additional support for learning is based on if for whatever reason they need extra help to reach their kind of full potential and benefit fully from their learning. And that's not just about academic learning and academic achievement, it's about their wider well-being and about things like their social and emotional development too. So if that's where your concerns or worries lie, that is valid, and it shouldn't be that your child doesn't get support just because they are academically quite able. So a good starting point, if there's not already been a conversation with the new school, is maybe to ask for an initial kind of catch up with them, and maybe even just a phone call or something with the guidance teacher to have a chat about those concerns and where your child's strengths lie, but also the things that you are worried about, and seeing if you can agree a plan together for what type of support they might need. It depends on how much support they might need or what their level of needs are, whether or not that's put into a more formal plan. Sometimes the schools might not look to have a formal learning support plan in place. It might more be that they agree with you some kind of regular check-ins, so you can have a chat every so often about how things are going, or sometimes like just a few emails backwards and forwards can be kind of helpful, just written record of what you're agreeing is going to happen and things. But yeah, I think that's hopefully a good enough starting point. Also, as well, with him going into high school, is to reflect his age. He should be involved in these conversations too, if he's able to be. So the school should be looking to listen to how he's found the move and what things he's worried about or feels like he's struggling with, and including him in discussions about how they can try and help him feel more settled and get on well with his learning moving forward. And I'm not sure if there's more you'd like to add.
No, I wasn't quite sure. No, I think that covers a lot of it. I wasn't sure, Geraldine, quite if it was that your son's in primary and he's moving to secondary next year. I didn't quite fully pick that up.
Oh, sorry, I've maybe misunderstood that.
Yeah, no, it was just to say if it is the kind of initial transition planning meeting conversation you're having. So if he's still in P7, another thing that might be quite helpful is to see if you can have a meeting if his current primary school are able, or you feel they're able to meet his needs quite well at the moment, and or even if there's kind of challenges there, getting a meeting that involves someone that's kind of working well with him at primary and kind of the new secondary school to talk about how he's currently being supported with his kind of social and emotional well-being needs at primary school, so that can kind of inform what happens next year and how they might want to approach that. Although it'll be different in high school because it's a new environment, that might be a good way to kind of start those conversations and highlight his strengths, but also kind of where he's been struggling with. And we do actually have a fact sheet about transition to high school called, I think, moving to high school, moving from primary to high school. I'm sure we'll link to it. And that covers the duties as well around. So the other important thing to know, just Geraldine, is there is a duty to plan. So it might not be a written plan, but at least 12 months in advance is when these conversations should be starting if he's about to make that move up next year.
Yeah, I'm sorry for misunderstanding that slightly, Geraldine, but Hannah's covered for me there.
I'm not sure if I did or if Mark did. So hard in one moment to pick up the full question.
Between you, I think you did.
Yeah.
Great. So move on to another one. So we've had a question from Leslie Ann. So Leslie Ann has said, I'm waiting on my son getting an official diagnosis for ADHD and autism. What would be the best support plan to put in place with his school? So Hannah, do you want to start there?
Thanks, Leslie Ann. So I know that can be a long wait. So I suppose one of the first things is just to be aware of, I think we've already said it, that your child doesn't need a diagnosis to be entitled to that support. Obviously, getting the diagnosis might help you understand and inform more about the best way to support him in school. And when I think I'm not sure if you said that, when they get that diagnosis, then that could trigger a meeting with the school to talk about the support that's in place and if there's anything more that can inform, but it shouldn't change your child's right to support at the moment. There are quite a few different types of plans in place, Leslie Ann, as we mentioned before. Different local authorities call them kind of different things. So it's quite hard for us to say from the outside what the exact type of plan that would be best for your child is. You can certainly have a read of our planning fact sheet and also speak to the school about the types of plans that they use. So the kind of key thing, I think, what we often say is it kind of comes down to is not the name of the plan, but there's some agreement where you all have a joint understanding of what your child's needs are, how they're going to be met, the goals of any supports, and some regular review dates. And it might be, if there's particular wellbeing needs your child has, it might be something that's more within something called a wellbeing plan or a getting it out right for every child plan. Or if it's more kind of specific education goals, might be called something a bit different. But I suppose the main thing is probably to start with speaking to the school about what sort of plans they're using, but actually can be more about the content of that you're getting all that information that you need and what you all feel the information is needed to keep things working and keep that communication going. Probably the best place to start with the school. I don't know if you've got anything more to add there, Mark.
Not much. I just completely agree that the name of the plan matters much less than the content of it. And we've got some useful information and some top tips on the parents section of our website about preparing for these types of meetings where you're maybe going to talk about a plan or putting one in place. So there's a page specifically on how can I get the most out of meetings with the school, and that's got tips about preparing. So you could, if you're getting in touch and there is a meeting organised, you could ask for an agenda of what's going to be discussed, or you yourself can maybe put forward a few things that you'd like to discuss. So send them a few bullet points in advance to kind of explain these are the key things that I've been worried about or that would be really helpful to have a chat through. It's also kind of really good if you if you have someone there to take along for some support, then you've got a right to do that, as Hannah mentioned earlier, to someone else. So that could be a kind of formal advocate, say from your local carers centre or something, but it can also be a friend, a colleague, a partner, whoever. But just having someone there on your side and kind of can sometimes be helpful at those meetings, because they're not always the easiest to kind of sit in them with the school. And also, again, it's really important in these kind of discussions around planning your child support to think about what your child's views are on all of this and include that within those discussions. So if they're able to be at that meeting themselves, ideal. And I'm not sure if we've mentioned them yet, but if it depends on the age of your child, but if they're between the ages of 12 and 15, there's free advocacy potentially available for them through the service My Rights, My Say. And there's more information about that on the My Rights, My Say website, which we'll link to in the comments below.
Great, thanks, Mark and Hannah. Okay, so we've had a question from Vicky. It's less specifically about plans, but I think it's still kind of relevant to kind of working together with the school. So Vicky says, so her son has just started an LCSC in a mainstream and speech and language therapy have signed him off. Is he guaranteed adequate support in his placement? So I think, Mark, if I'm right, I think it's your turn to start, if that's all right.
Yeah, I think so. So if I've understood that correctly, the son's moving to a kind of a support unit, is that right? Or are they already there? Or
just started.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fab. So thanks for your question, Vicky. In terms of your son's rights to support, he has the same right to get support with his learning regardless of where he goes to school. So whether he's in a mainstream or in a support unit or in a special school, it's just about if for whatever reason he needs extra or different help to benefit from his learning, he's got a right to then get support with that. And the phrasing in the law is that the support must be adequate and efficient. It's a bit vague, maybe, but it's just hard to be more specific because obviously every pupil's different, every situation's different. But the important thing is his support should be based on his needs, his individual needs, and about helping him work towards his full potential. So when you've asked if it needs to kind of be adequate, I think that really comes down to, well, what things does your son find more difficult or need more help with? And then having the chat with the school about what support they can do specifically targeted to helping him in those areas and with those things and helping him work towards his full potential, whatever that is, across his academic and social and emotional kind of well-being.
And I think just to kind of add on that, Mark, I think Vicky, you mentioned particularly about your son being signed off from speech and language therapy. And I don't know if that's kind of related to your worries about the support not being adequate, but it, you know, the law is really that it's about your son's individual needs, as Mark said. There's not a specific criteria or he needs to have speech and language therapy involved to be entitled to support. You know, it might be, you know, it depends on the context, but, you know, what we sometimes hear of us on the helpline is, you know, a service might step back a bit because actually that support's being delivered really well in the school, or they've moved to a school where there's already more teachers or support staff that are able to meet that speech and language needs. So it doesn't mean that your son's sort of support has been removed necessarily, or that he wouldn't be entitled to that support again if he starts to need it again. It just means that it should continue, and that's often where kind of working together with the school if something like that has happened. So someone's been removed or they've changed the way their support, really you should be involved in decisions about that, and you can go to the school and say, well, you know, speech and language therapy are not involved anymore, but, you know, my son still has these needs or still needs support with this. How else are we planning to meet those needs? Because even though the way support looks like might have changed, your son may still have those needs. So you can always go back to them and get a bit more of an explanation, and it might kind of trigger a conversation with them about how to support him if speech and language therapy are no longer involved.
Yeah, and having a type of written support plan can be really helpful for this type of scenario too, because where, as Hannah mentioned, where supports might change or what they look like or who's involved might change, they still need to make sure that they're offering your child the support that they need. And in the plan, it should be setting some targets and goals for them to work towards with their support. So if your child's starting to not meet those goals or targets or is struggling again on to kind of achieve what they should be able to under their plan, then that can be a kind of a trigger for having a new conversation with the school to say we've changed the support, but it's maybe not working for them. How else can we maybe try and meet their needs, or what else can we do to better support them now?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've had quite a few more questions in, so just so we might not be able to get to all of them today, but we will post some replies later on, and anyone that we can't get to can also absolutely get in touch with our helpline, and we're more than happy to chat things through. I'll try and squeeze in at least one, if not two more before we finish those. So the next one is from Anna. So I'll read it out to you. So, my child is midway through primary, recently diagnosed with ADHD. Feedback from school to psychology indicated things happening in the classroom that we weren't aware of. How can we make sure we're asking the right questions going forward? And how frequently should we meet or seek progress updates from the school? Some ADHD guides I've read suggest monthly meetings, but I don't think the school will have time for that. Do you want me to read that again, or have you got that?
I think so. I can start, but Mark, you can chip in if not. So yeah, Anna. So you were saying about how your child's midway through primary school, and you've obviously heard some things from the psychology report about that you didn't know were going on, which can be really worrying, and understandably, you're worried about your child and want to have that communication with the school to see what's going on, and that's really important in terms of school and home supporting each other, because it means if things are going on in the classroom that you can talk to your child about at home, and if anything's going on at home you can pass that on to the school. There isn't a set way that this is done, so I'm afraid it sounds like you've looked at a few guidance and are trying really hard to find an answer, Anna. So the long guidance doesn't say yes, this is how often a meeting should happen, or this catch up should be. But I suppose it's about if things haven't been working and there's maybe an issue around communication, or you didn't know what was going on, understandably you're going to be concerned. And I suppose it's maybe starting with a meeting with the school to actually just talk about communication and how you can keep up to date. We hear of different examples. So some families might use a home school communication diary, where there's a note put at the end of the day, or at the end of the week, just to kind of summarize what's been going on and how things are going. That should include things that are going well as things that aren't working so well. And then there might be kind of termly meetings as well, or kind of ad hoc meetings. So an agreement, if this happens or something really doesn't work, then someone's going to give you a phone call. Or I think it's about really what we often talk about is almost a communication plan with the school, Anna, about what feels reasonable to you and what feels reasonable to the school. In a way, sometimes that they want to get on with moving forward and supporting your child, so having 2 regular meetings isn't always particularly helpful. So it's a hard one for us to say exactly, but sitting down with the school and your child's new class teacher and saying, obviously that you were concerned about, what you'd heard in the psychologist report, if that's the kind of main thing you're worried about, and how can we find a way so that that's not missed, and so that we're all working on the same page. And there are quite a lot of different strategies around how exactly to do that. It sounds like you've already looked into some of them, Anna, but it's probably starting with the school and then seeing if there's kind of a compromise and trialing that for a while and seeing if it works. And if not, you can have more regular meetings, or they might start regularly and then get longer, as things work a bit better, be less frequent. I don't know if there's anything you want to add there, Mark.
Not much, just maybe to echo your last point there, that in terms of how often you meet, it might be that while things are maybe a little bit more unsettled, or you're still trying to get things right, that you ask for a little bit more of a regular chat with the school or updates, and then it's okay to let them know you're not expecting that to carry on indefinitely. You're not expecting a kind of daily update every day or weekly meeting, but just to get things settled. And once hopefully they are, you can then move to maybe say once a term to have a bit of a more kind of fuller check-in and see how things are going.
Yeah, great. I'm going to squeeze in one final question, I think. So I'm going to pick out a kind of an issue from a comment from Morven, because I think it's something we've definitely heard a few times on the helpline, so it might be useful for quite a few people watching. So she's explained that her son, who's in high school, he does have a support plan in place, but the teachers don't seem to be putting the suggestions into practice. So I wonder if you could maybe speak a little bit to that, Mark.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Morgan. And it is something that we do hear about from other parents occasionally too. It's a difficult one, but sometimes it's helpful maybe to put something in writing to the your key contact at the school, so say the pastoral care teacher or head of support for learning or whoever it is, but to kind of let them know that there's this plan in place, but it's not been happening, or not all the teachers have maybe been aware of it, and ask the school for an update on kind of how they're going to make sure that moving forward things are more kind of consistently in place, and that it is that your child's, all of their teachers are aware of what support they might need, and kind of what the plan for that is. If you've already tried that and it's still just not really happening, and it keeps not happening, then it's maybe something to try and escalate up a little bit within the school. So raise your concerns maybe with the deputy or head teacher, just to kind of let them know. It's a bit frustrating, but normally it's best to try and get things back on track by working together with the school, because that will bring about the quickest change, and it's kind of them that are going to be working together with you and your child on an ongoing basis. But if you've already tried those steps or are still really struggling, then there is the option to get in touch with the additional support for learning contact at your local authority and have a chat with them. And that doesn't need to be a formal complaint. It can just be getting in touch to say, my child needs some support, there's a plan in place, but like the school are struggling to kind of actually provide that support, and ask for their help in trying to get things back on track. Hopefully one of those things would get things a bit more consistent again for you, but I'm not sure if there's anything for you to add, Hannah.
No, I think it's conversation. I think I had someone on the helpline this morning. It's about, it can be really frustrating when you kind of started the new term, or there's been an agreement that you think, and you think that's kind of ticking away and your child's supported, and then you find out that they aren't. You kind of got something already in writing, but the issue is that it's just not being put into place. And I think it is kind of slowly working up the stages of the school, and hopefully at some point that's kind of the right place to start. So I think certainly, as Mark said, starting with an email to whoever responsible for support for your child to see if they can, how is this all being communicated with his class teachers? Is there a reminder that can be sent out that this is the support he requires? And then if things aren't moving forward, then kind of taking it a bit further up the school to see if there's what's not working, and how you can find a way that this support is delivered in each of his classes, and kind of him being involved in that, and maybe highlighting the impact that's having on him is hopefully. But there are further steps, as Mark says, if it continues to not move on more than.
Great. And yeah, I'm sorry that there's a few more questions that we're not going to be able to get time to answer, but like I said before, absolutely you can get in touch with our helpline by, you can phone us, you can email us, you can use web chat. Sometimes the helpline can be a bit busy straight after a Facebook Live session, but absolutely, you can keep trying, and we'll kind of get to you as soon as we can. Before we finish up, just wondering, is there anything else that we didn't mention, either Hannah or Mark, that you had wanted to get across? Or
Don't think so, not for me.
No, I don't think so.
Great. Well, we've covered quite a lot, and thank you so much everyone for watching and for your questions. Just before you go, if you do have time, or if you listen to this later and have time, we would appreciate your feedback on the session. So Kat is going to post a few questions below that you can comment on, or you can message us privately if you prefer. So we've got our next session plan on children's rights for the 29th of September. So wondering what kind of time slot works better for you. Is it kind of in the morning around 11ish, or the evening at more like 7ish? It would also just be useful to know if you found the session helpful, or if not, how it could have been improved, and if there's anything you're going to do as a result of watching this session that might be different from what you would have done if you hadn't. So like I said, the next session is going to be on the 29th of September, and that's going to be specifically about the rights of children and young people aged 12 to 15 with additional support needs, because they have some specific rights to be involved in decisions and discussions around their support. So you can keep an eye on our Facebook page for further details about that. But in general, thank you all so much for your questions and your engagement. Thanks to Hannah and Mark for answering them, and thanks so much to Greg, our BSL interpreter, as well for doing that for us today. And I think that's us. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Bye.